DIY small block Ford cam bearing install. Let's do this.
Greetings, fellow DIYer, and welcome to my video.
There are basically two categories of videos on my channel. Those relating to cars and those related to fabrication. The nice thing is, occasionally those categories overlap, and that's where we're at right here. This is a camshaft out of a small block Ford. This is a truck roller cam, and these are small block Ford cam bearings. Now, what's interesting about the small block Ford, and when I say small block Ford, I'm talking about the Windsor series, so 289, 302, 351 Windsor, is that each cam bearing gets progressively larger as we move towards the front of the motor. I think Ford did this to make it easier to install the camshaft. So we have smaller bearing here, then there's a little more clearance here, a little more clearance, and then the biggest one. The challenge is, that means that you need either an adjustable tool to install cam bearings, or you need a separate driver for each specific cam bearing. Now, a lot of guys, they don't even install cam bearings themselves. They go to the machine shop, they drop the block off, they have all the work done, and while it's there, the machine shop installs the cam bearings. And typically, they charge $50 to $100 for 20 minutes work. I have no problem with a machine shop making a living, charging you what they need to cover their tools, their time, their overhead, their expense. I'm not saying that the machine shop is gouging anybody, but I got to thinking, if I'm going to be building more than a few small block Fords, maybe I should look into a cam bearing tool. The only ones I found out there were the adjustable ones, where you tighten it down and the rubber expands and it conforms to the different sizes. And while that's an effective tool and is an option, I wanted something that was a little cleaner and was a little more accident proof. I wanted something that was very specific to each cam bearing so that I knew the install was clean. So I decided to make one myself. This right here is my DIY homemade cam bearing install tool for a small block Ford. I have 5 different pucks that correspond to the 5 different sizes on the camshaft. And then I have this right here, which goes in the number 1 slot with no bearing in it, so that I have a guide for my drivers. Then I also have this piece right here, which is what allows me to attach my pucks to said drivers. All these pieces are machined out of aluminum. If this was something that I was going to be using all the time, if I was a machine shop, I would have made these out of steel because it would see daily use, and aluminum is not up to the task of repeated daily use. But for me, I may use this 10 times or less in my lifetime, at which point aluminum serves me just fine. It's easy to work with, and it's inexpensive. So that's why I went the aluminum route. I started with aluminum just like this. This is 2 1/4 round stock. I cut it into chunks. I chucked the pieces up into my lathe, and I took a pass on the outside just to take the minimum amount of material off of them that I needed to get them round and true. And then, starting with the largest one, I began turning down the diameters based on measurements that I took from the camshaft. Now, the reason I started with the largest one and went smaller is on the off chance that I took a little too deep of a cut and made this one, say, too small, then not a problem. I can start on this one again, and depending on how deep the accidental cut was, I can use the one that was supposed to be here now as this one or whatever size it was going to fit best in. And to be completely honest, that is exactly what happened to me when I was making this kit. This one went great. This one went great. This one ended up being this one because I just went a little too far. I wasn't paying attention. I got a deeper cut than I wanted to. So sized it down to this guy and remade this one. I thought about demonstrating how I made these, but it just seemed like this was pretty simple lathe work. You know, there's no fancy tricks or anything. I'm just turning down a diameter and leaving a shoulder. And then I'm boring a hole in it for the driver. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense for me to make an extra one just to show you guys how I did this. And frankly, there wasn't a whole lot there for you to see. The other thing that is really important when creating these diameters is to make them about 5 thousandths smaller than the actual cam measurements. These fit, I wouldn't say snugly, but they are a solid fit inside the bearings. And when you press the bearings in using the driver, occasionally the shape will change ever so slightly. And if you go with the size that is on here, there's a chance that the tool will stick. And in the process of trying to get that out, you run the risk of damaging the bearing. So I went 5 thousandths under on all 5 pucks, just so the fit was a little bit looser, especially since the finish on this is good, but there is still a little bit of texture there. And I did not want to damage my bearings when installing. Now the way this works is pretty simple. We're going to install the number 5 bearing first, and you can see I've got the puck stamped number 5. So we're going to set that up, and this is basically my driver piece. So I got a nut, I got a washer, and then I got a 5/16 bolt. Now making this was pretty simple. I started with this round piece of steel here. I chucked it up in the lathe, I faced it on both ends, and then I made sure that the inner diameter and the outer diameter were both perfectly concentric. Did that with a boring bar and with just a basic cutting tool on the outside. The reason I did that is because you want everything to line up and to be square. Once I had this piece ready to go, I welded it to this piece of steel and then turned it round on the lathe and bored it out, and I also faced it. Now to use this, bolt goes in, number 5, you can see it right there. It goes on there, washer on the outside, tighten that down. We now have our driver. Now the last piece is I put a piece of rubber hose on top of the threads because I did not want to run the risk of nicking my bearings as I am putting the bearings over this tool. We grab bearing number 5, we slide it over the aluminum tool. Like I said, it's a decent fit. There's not a lot of slop there, but it does slide fairly easily. And now we are ready to put this into the motor and drive this bearing home. The driver is just simply a piece of pipe. Now this is the short one, and this is the long one. I've got a grade 8 bolt pressed into the end of both of these so that hitting it with the hammer is not going to cause it to mushroom and deform. Plus it also has the advantage of when you set it down, it doesn't roll. I'm just going to show you with this smaller one so it's easier to see on camera. So this is the guide puck that goes in the number 1 slot when there's no bearing installed. The driver fits through. Then we go into the bearing holder, and we can now drive this bearing into its slot, and we don't have to worry about it going in crooked. We don't have to worry about it not being lined up properly because everything is set to go. The beveled edge on the bearing allows it to slip into the block just where it's supposed to be. The guide on this end and all this being true allows it to go in straight. And really, driving bearings in or out using this tool is a piece of cake. So the first step in the process is to install the guide puck. And like I said before, this fits into the number 1 spot with no bearing installed. Now, I've used it this way a lot of times, but it does tend to kind of move around. So I fished through my scrap pile, found this piece of steel with these slots in it, and I'm going to use that as a way to secure this guide puck. It's not seeing a lot of force, doesn't have to be anything remotely this thick. Just some sheet steel probably would have gotten the job done. But I wanted to keep it simple, and this piece fits the bill. So the first bearing we're going to install is the number 5 bearing, which is this one right here. Now, there's a plug that goes into the end of the block to seal this opening. But I like to wait to install that until all the bearings have been installed in the block and I've confirmed that the camshaft fits in there properly. Because if for some reason we had to remove this number 5 bearing, we would have to knock that plug out and I'd have to get a replacement plug. So there's really no reason to install it until the bearings are in. So here's the head that we assembled in the first part of the video with the number 5 puck. And this is the number 5 bearing. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is this groove right here. And that is the oiling hole that provides oil to said bearing. If you install this incorrectly oriented, then oil will not be getting to this part of the camshaft. The oiling hole is right here and the passage goes down through here. So we have to line up that slot with that hole. So we're just going to put the head down in here, get it approximately oriented. We're going to push the driving rod into the head. And we can back it out and adjust the angle so that the oiling hole matches the hole in the bearing. Now that everything's lined up, all we have to do is drive the bearing in. I'm using a fairly small hammer so that it takes more blows to get it there because I want to move slowly and get everything lined up properly. Once the edge of the puck lines up with the edge of the block, we will have the bearing at the correct depth. And just like that, bearing number 5 has been installed. At this point, I like to take a pick and gently go down the hole, make sure that it comes through the bearing, that oil is going to be able to travel in there, and it will. So we can install the next bearing. So I've swapped out to the number 4 puck. Put the bearing on the puck. Now the bearings are numbered, and so that makes it easy to know which bearing goes where. Also, the sizes are different enough that it's pretty hard to incorrectly install a bearing, like put it in the wrong spot. If this was not the correct bearing, I would not have the fit that I do on the puck. Just like before, we get it into position. Back it out a little, make sure that the groove lines up with our oiling hole, and we drive it home. And we rinse and repeat for the next couple of bearings. When I get to the number 2 bearing, I end up switching to my shorter driver because the long driver is just simply too much to go between 2 bearing locations. All right, so we have now come to the number 1 bearing. So we need to remove the guide puck. Now, normally this is the hardest bearing to install because we no longer have any way to guide the process and keep everything square, because your head is fitting like this and you're having to tap it in. So if you get it a little bit crooked, a little bit of an angle, you can run into issues. The other challenge with the number 1 bearing is we now have 2 slots that we need to line up. So getting it in correctly is even more critical on this one. The footage at the beginning of this video, where I'm showing you all the parts and pieces that go into this bearing install tool, was shot yesterday. And as I was thinking about what I needed to do today to install these bearings, I was thinking about what a pain in the butt this number 1 bearing can be. And I thought, there has got to be a better way to do this, an easier way, a way that it goes in straight without a whole lot of hassle. I'm always one that is trying to build a better mousetrap, and I constantly think through projects that I have coming up to see if I can come up with a better way to get it done. The more I thought about it, I thought, I wish there was a way that I could press the bearing in, that I could just suck it down in, maybe with some all thread or something. And then that got me thinking, well, I'd have to be super careful with all thread because I would hate to nick one of my brand new cam bearings. And then an epiphany struck. If I install each of the pucks in their home, and then I install a piece of 5/16 all thread with a stop that matches the block, I can use a nut and tighten it down and just pull the bearing in. Now, I've not tried this. There is no bearing in this front hole, so you're going to be coming along with me as we pry the new and improved DIY cam bearing tool. This seems like a very effective means of protecting the bearings that I just installed and getting this threaded rod in place. Now, my only concern is that 5/16 may be a little on the small side, so we will see how that plays out as I install the bearing. Okay, so I have the stop at the end of the block. As I said when I was showing you the bearing, there are 2 oil passages that I need to line up with. One is right there, and the other one is where this comes through. So what I'm going to do is put a little mark right there, and then we're going to do the same right here so that I know from the face where those slots need to line up. We have the number 1 bearing in the number 1 puck. Going to hold the all thread and get it into place. And then I just need to put a nut on it and tighten that nut down. All right, let's see if this works as well as I hope it will. Slide a plate on there just to have a little extra strength. Now, my threaded rod is way too long, so if this ends up working, I will shorten this up significantly so it is the correct length for a small block Ford, but so that I don't have to spend a ton of time getting the nut down over the threaded rod. I've got the oiling holes lined up with the 2 lines that I made. Let's see how this works. It's sliding in there. Double check, make sure our oiling holes are lined up, and they still are. I definitely liked that way better than driving it in with this short driver. All right, once we have the number 1 bearing installed, you can remove the puck. We can, once again, use the pick to confirm that this slot lines up. And then this one's pretty critical. I usually just use a flashlight, and I can see the light in the hole. You can see light coming through, and that tells you that that is lined up as well. with these two slots being smaller than the slots for the other bearings, this one's just a little bit more challenging to make sure you get it lined up properly. So some fantastic advice that I got from Mustang Steve of FYI Ford. Now that's a forum that is Ford specific. It started out as a group of Mustang guys, and it's mostly Mustang guys, but they even let in Galaxy folks like me. Of course, I have a Mustang also. But anything that's Ford related, it's a fantastic resource. Steve of that forum said whenever you're assembling a short block, the very first thing you should do is put the camshaft in. And that is brilliant advice. The reason you want to do that first is if you install the crank and the pistons and you get all that stuff in place, then you go to put the camshaft in. If something's not lining up properly, if a bearing isn't set properly, if it's cockeyed or there's a tolerance issue or something does not fit properly, you have to now disassemble everything to be able to clean up the nick in the bearing or do what you need to do there. So I have installed the camshaft in this and it spins freely. There are no issues, which means we did it right. The bearings that I put in are lined up correctly. All the oiling holes line up. The camshaft spins freely. This install was successful and we are ready to go to the next phase of the build.
If you like what you've seen, please click like. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.
We grab bearing number 5. That's bearing number 1.